High in the Andes, where air thins and mountains scrape the sky, an empire rose without wheels, without iron, without written language. Yet it bound millions of people across deserts, valleys, and jungles. The Inca called it Tawantinsuyu, the land of four quarters. At its height in the 15th century, the Incan Empire stretched 2,500 miles along South America's spine, from modern Colombia to Chile. Roads paved with stone cut across impossible terrain. Rope bridges swayed over chasms. Terraces clung to mountainsides, feeding armies and cities alike. From the imperial capital of Cusco, messages sped on foot, relayed by runners who carried knotted cords of data called quipus. The Incas built with stone so precise that earthquakes could not shake it. They ruled with both diplomacy and force, weaving conquered peoples into a vast administrative machine. Sun temples glittered with gold, but power lay in organisation, the ability to command labour, redistribute crops, and move armies through the clouds. Yet the empire that seemed eternal lasted barely a century at its height. Civil war and foreign invasion tore it apart, leaving only stones, myths, and the question: how did a civilization rise so high and fall so quickly? Long before the Inca carved Cusco into the mountains, the Andes had nurtured civilizations for millennia. This was no easy cradle. Altitude stole breath, weather swung violently, and fertile land came only in narrow strips between cliffs and deserts. Yet here, human ingenuity thrived. The earliest cultures, such as the Norte Chico on Peru's coast, circa 3000 BCE, built monumental architecture, while Egypt was still raising pyramids. Inland, the Chavin culture, circa 900 to 200 BCE, spread religious and artistic traditions from their highland temples, uniting diverse peoples through shared symbols of jaguars and serpents. Centuries later, the Moche engineered irrigation canals across deserts, leaving behind vivid ceramics of gods, warriors, and daily life. The Nazca drew massive geoglyphs, the Nazca lines, etched into the earth, visible fully only from the sky. The Wari and Tiwanaku empires, circa 500 to 1000 CE, pioneered state systems, road networks, terracing, and administrative centres that prefigured Inca methods. When the Wari and Tiwanaku collapsed, smaller polities filled the vacuum, kingdoms and chiefdoms scattered across valleys and plateaus. Out of this fractured landscape, sometime in the early 1200s, a small group known as the Inca settled in the Cusco Valley. They were not yet conquerors, but their environment, stone, sky, and survival, was already teaching them lessons in endurance. The empire's spark lay waiting, in a land that demanded nothing less than genius to endure. The Inca began as one among many highland groups in the Cusco Valley around the 13th century. Surrounded by rivals, they were neither the strongest nor the wealthiest. But through strategic alliances and relentless warfare, they grew into a formidable power. Legend credits the dynasty's rise to Manco Capac, a mythical founder sent by the sun god, Inti. Historically, it was rulers like Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui in the 1400s who transformed Cusco from a regional town into the beating heart of an empire. Under Pachacuti, the Incas began systematic conquest, subduing neighbours not just with armies, but with a model of integration. Conquered peoples were offered a place in Tawantinsuyu structure. They could keep local leaders and traditions if they swore loyalty and paid tribute. In exchange, the Inca provided protection, roads, and access to goods. Resistance was crushed, but accommodation was common. Populations were sometimes resettled, moved across the empire to dilute rebellion and spread knowledge. The empire's genius was organisational. Lands were divided into decimal units, groups of 10 households, then 100, then 1,000, each accountable for labour and tribute. Storehouses stockpiled maize, potatoes, and textiles, ensuring armies could march and cities could thrive. By the late 15th century, The Inca had absorbed rival powers like the Chimu on the northern coast, stretching their rule from Ecuador to Chile. A mosaic of languages and cultures now moved under a single banner. Cusco was no longer just a city. It was the navel of the world, from which the four great quarters of Tawantinsuyu radiated like the spokes of the sun. The Inca had become empire. By the mid-15th century, under rulers like Pachacuti and his son Tupac Inca Yupanqui, the Incan Empire reached its golden age. In less than a century, they built the largest empire the Americas had ever seen, an expanse of mountains, deserts and jungles tied together by stone and strategy. The empire's lifeline was its road network, over 25,000 miles of paved routes threading across the Andes, deserts and rainforests. Suspension bridges of woven fibre spanned canyons, stairways carved into cliffs connected valleys. Along these roads, relay runners called chasqui carried messages, sometimes covering 150 miles in a day. Agriculture underpinned everything. The Incas mastered terracing, cutting steps into mountainsides to capture water and prevent erosion. Crops like potatoes, quinoa and maize sustained millions, while storehouses ensured food security even in years of famine. Llamas and alpacas provided transport, wool and meat. Religion infused empire. The sun god Inti reigned supreme, with Cusco's Coricancha temple dazzling in sheets of gold. Festivals marked the rhythm of the year, binding subjects in shared ritual. At the same time, local gods, huacas, were incorporated, ensuring conquered peoples saw their traditions reflected in the empire. Cusco was redesigned as a cosmic centre, its streets radiating like sunbeams, its palaces clad in stone blocks so finely cut they withstood earthquakes. Machu Picchu, likely built as a royal estate, perched high in the mountains, blending seamlessly with its environment. A city in the clouds. At its height, Tawantinsuyu governed perhaps 10 million people. It was an empire without wheels or money, but with labour, land and loyalty as its currency. Order radiated outward from Cusco, and for a moment it seemed the empire might last forever. But beneath the perfection of its stone walls, cracks were forming, cracks that would widen into civil war and open the door to invaders from across the sea. By the early 16th century, the empire that stretched from Quito to Santiago was trembling. In 1527, Emperor Huayna Capac died, likely of smallpox introduced by Europeans moving ahead of conquest. His death sparked a bitter succession struggle between his sons, Huasca in Cusco and Atahualpa in Quito. The civil war ripped Tawantinsuyu apart. Armies of tens of thousands clashed in the highlands. Villages were burned, loyalties divided. Atahualpa eventually triumphed, but his victory came as the empire was exhausted, its unity fractured. Into this chaos marched a small band of Spaniards led by Francisco Pizarro. In 1532, with fewer than 200 men, they lured Atahualpa to a meeting in Cajamarca. There, ambush and steel clashed against shock and confusion. Horses, cannons and steel swords, the Inca had never seen such weapons. Thousands of Atahualpa's men were cut down, while the Sapa Inca himself was captured. Despite paying a ransom of rooms filled with gold and silver, the largest ransom in recorded history, Atahualpa was executed in 1533. The Spaniards marched on Cusco, seizing the heart of the empire. Resistance did not end immediately. Inca generals and loyalists retreated to the mountains, establishing a neo-Inca state at Vilcabamba that resisted for decades. But the machinery of Tawantinsuyu, its roads, its labour system, its storehouses, was turned against it by the invaders. By the late 16th century, the Incan Empire had crumbled, its temples dismantled, its treasures melted into bullion for ships bound across the Atlantic. What had been built in a century was unmade in a few decades. Yet Incan culture, language, and memory endured, carried in the Quechua tongue and the stones that still cling to the Andes. With Cusco fallen and Vilcabamba destroyed in 1572, the political heart of the Incan Empire was gone. Yet the empire's people remained. Millions of Quechua and Aymara-speaking farmers, herders and artisans spread across the Andes. Under Spanish rule, they were reorganized into encomiendas, forced labor systems that demanded tribute in silver, crops and sweat. The most infamous site of exploitation was Potosí, in modern Bolivia, where indigenous miners were driven into mountain shafts to extract silver that funded Spain's global empire. The wealth that once fueled Inca terraces and temples now flowed into Spanish galleons. Still, resistance flickered. Leaders like Tupac Amaru I in the 16th century, and later Tupac Amaru II in the 18th, rose in rebellion, calling on Incan heritage as a banner of unity. Though brutally suppressed, these uprisings ensured the memory of the Inca remained a living force, not just a ghost. Religion became a battleground of reinvention. Catholic missionaries sought to erase sun worship, yet Andean communities blended Christian saints with huacas, preserving old spiritual landscapes under new names. The stones of Incan temples often became the foundations of colonial churches, fusion by force, but fusion nonetheless. By the 19th century, as South America's independence war swept through the Andes, Inca imagery again emerged, heroes of a lost golden age invoked as symbols of anti-colonial resistance. The empire had long since fallen, but its echo became a rallying cry. Incan rule was gone, but Incan identity endured, woven into language, ritual, and memory. An empire reinvented in spirit, surviving in the people who still tilled the terraces under the eternal sky. By the 19th century, newly independent nations like Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador were redefining themselves. Incan heritage, once suppressed under colonial rule, became a symbol of pride and continuity. Leaders and writers celebrated Tawantinsuyu as proof that the Andes had birthed greatness long before European conquest. In the 20th century, archaeology and tourism reshaped the world's vision of the Inca. The 1911 rediscovery of Machu Picchu by Hiram Bingham catapulted the stone city into global fame. Suddenly, the terraces and temples of the high Andes were not ruins of a forgotten empire, but icons of human ingenuity admired worldwide. At the same time, Andean communities continued living with traditions that predated the empire itself. Quechua and Aymara languages, festivals tied to the sun and seasons, weaving techniques that traced patterns older than conquest. The Inca became both a scholarly subject and a living presence in Andean daily life. In modern Peru, Incan identity has become a cornerstone of national culture. Cusco thrives as both a modern city and a ceremonial capital of Incan heritage. Tourists walk roads once trodden by chasqui. Farmers still tend terraced fields designed centuries ago. Yet beneath the pride lies tension. Poverty, inequality, and the marginalization of indigenous peoples remain sharp. The Inca legacy is celebrated in monuments and festivals, but the descendants of the empire often struggle for land rights and recognition. The Inca live on, in the stones that refuse to crumble, in the tongues that still name the mountains, and in the memory of an empire that reached the clouds. The legacy of the Inca is not frozen in stone. It lives in the choices South America faces today. The Andes themselves are shifting. Climate change is melting glaciers that once fed rivers and terraced farms. Ancient irrigation systems, designed for steady flows, strain under unpredictable rains and droughts. For rural communities still farming potatoes and quinoa, the survival strategies of their Incan ancestors, terracing, crop diversity, communal labour may once again prove essential. Tourism, a cornerstone of Peru's economy, also cuts both ways. Machu Picchu draws millions, but footfall erodes its fragile stones and threatens the very heritage that sustains livelihoods. Balancing preservation with access is an unresolved fault line. Protect too tightly, and livelihoods suffer. Open too widely, and the ruins crumble. Politically, the Inca remain a symbol of identity and protest. Indigenous groups invoke Tawantinsuyu as proof of sovereignty older than colonial borders, demanding land rights, cultural recognition, and political power. The empire may have fallen centuries ago, but its memory remains a rallying banner in today's struggles. Globally, Incan engineering, from terracing to storage systems, is being re-examined as models for sustainable living in harsh environments. The empire that once seemed primitive to Europeans may hold blueprints for survival in an unstable climate. The Incan Empire rose swiftly, fell violently, yet endures in stone, memory, and living tradition. Its future lies not in rebuilding what was lost, but in how its echoes guide the Andes and the world through challenges still to come.